Well, it's clear that I have the least cool jacket on this stage right now. There are a lot of reasons I'm happy to be here tonight, but not the least is that my connection with Space Camp goes back 40 years to the time in 1983 when I was sent here as a reporter for Science Digest magazine to write the first cover story we ran on Space Camp. Pardon me, I'm hyperventilating a little bit. Many years later, still covering Space Camp, I had the privilege of appearing in the film The Mars Generation, which of course is centered on Space Camp. Now, even at this age, I still consider myself a proud space camper. But of course, we're not here tonight to talk about my earthbound space work. The true space travels of the four people on stage with me are who we're here to celebrate. There is no overstating the remarkable achievements of Jared Isaacman, Dr. Sian Proctor, Hayley Arceneaux, and Chris Sembroski. In the span of human history, fewer than 600 people have ever traveled in space. The Inspiration crew, the first civilian crew of astronauts, is in some ways more special, more elite than all of them. Jared, Sian, Hayley, and Chris have expanded space, democratized space, in some ways kicked the door of space open to the rest of us. Space is a different place for what they have accomplished, and for that we owe them our thanks. So let's start with that. Jared, what about that idea of democratizing space? Have you opened the door for space? Is space different for what you've accomplished?
Well, I think that, look, I mean, it's a pretty exciting time in the commercial space industry, but we have to acknowledge really what SpaceX has accomplished. I mean, if it wasn't for, reusable rocket technology, which has materially reduced the cost to access orbit, there wouldn't have been an Inspiration4. I mean, you have some very talented people, like there are across all the commercial industry now, that work very hard to bring science fiction to reality, and we benefited from that quite a bit. I'd like to think that we had an opportunity to observe them at work and maybe play a very small part in the history they're making, which is with the idea that the world is a more interesting place when everyone can journey among the stars. That's the vision that 10,000 really talented people are working towards, and I think we were just super lucky to play a very small part in that.
And you've been the emissary for, in some ways, the other 7 billion of us. Sian, you mentioned earlier that you are the first black woman to pilot a spacecraft, and your accomplishment comes 100 years after the first black woman to get her pilot license. Tell me a little bit about the special responsibility, the special opportunity, and in some ways the special burden you carried for people who look up to you and look to you for inspiration.
It's pretty interesting that 100 years ago in 1921, Bessie Coleman became the first black woman and indigenous woman to earn a pilot license, and she had to do it by actually leaving the United States and going over to France because of segregation in the United States, and then to have the honor and privilege to become the Inspiration4 pilot and the first black woman to pilot a spacecraft. I just wanted to win to go to space. I'll never forget when Jared said, congratulations, you won the prosperity seat, and I want you to be my mission pilot. And you're like, yeah, could you repeat that, please? To be able to take that, and I think about Bessie Coleman and how she had to have grit and determination and perseverance to be able to do what she did. and not be afraid to take on that challenge. And so when Jared said that to me, I was like, okay, we can do this. We can figure this out. And I just feel so much gratitude for being able to inspire so many young girls and women of color around the world to dream big, that they can do this. Because there were two things that I wanted to do. Well, I should say three. I wanted to go to space camp when I was a kid. I wanted to be a fighter pilot and an astronaut. And here I am with all three. So amazing.
Bravo. Bravo. Hayley, as a physician assistant at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, you have often said that you already have the best job in the world, helping children battle a disease that you fought and you beat. How has going to space made that job even bigger and somehow more transformative for you?
First off, good evening, everyone, and I'm so honored to be here with just so many people with incredible stories. And thank you for that question. Getting that job at St. Jude was truly my dream job. It's all I've ever wanted to do for 20 years. And going to space was never something I really thought would ever happen, and it's something I never could have done, as I'm not physically perfect from my cancer journey. And it wasn't until Inspiration4 that dream I didn't know I had became a reality. But getting back to work with these kids and getting to share with them, not only do I understand what they're going through because I understand the cancer thing, but what life can look like after cancer. That has been so special, because just seeing their faces and seeing that hope and hearing them say that, well, I had a kid the other day who's told me he's going to be an astronaut, but he's got to ask his mom first. And I said, okay, well, I did the same thing. I had to ask my mom first. But that was just, it's so special. And it's because of Jared. It's because of Inspiration4, getting to show these kids what life can look like after cancer.
And Chris, in some ways, you are already a part of the aeronautics and astronautics community. You served in the Air Force, you work for Lockheed Martin, you have been a part of the organization, or a part of the community for a long time. Was becoming an astronaut nonetheless as head-snapping for you as it would be for the rest of us? Or did somehow it feel like a natural transition from what you had been doing?
Well, it was far from a natural transition. I mean, I had dreams of going to space or seeing my campers go to space as a counselor. When I was a counselor in Space Camp in Titusville, in Florida, and seeing all the space shuttle launches. But I had started taking a different path. I was hoping to get as close to aerospace as possible. You know, joining the Air Force out of all the military branches, you know, because I know they're the ones going into space and doing aviation. Choosing rocketry because I know there was an opportunity to possibly to go to Vandenberg or to Patrick Air Force Base at the time in Florida. None of those really quite panned out the way I expected them to, but I took those skills and those opportunities that the Air Force taught me and ran with them and began to develop a career in building automation and how to save energy and how to make the world a better place by making buildings operate better. And I thought that just having a side hobby of, you know, maybe some rocketry or turning on to space shuttle launches or to SpaceX launches on the TV or to YouTube streams at any time, that's good enough, you know. And then the Super Bowl happened and the commercial came up, and all right, I'll donate. This is kind of a neat kind of idea. But, you know, being told on a Zoom call that you're going to be an astronaut, absolutely head-snapping. It brought back that tidal wave of excitement that I felt every time you drive up on the bus tour at Kennedy Space Center and you see pad 39A and pad 39B, and there's something maybe rolling by on the crawler way that's, you know, at a high speed of 1.5 miles an hour. But I mean, getting it to the pad, it's that excitement that we always tried to instill as counselors and crew trainers with our kids, and but nonetheless, that kind of came flooding back after being suppressed for so long.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about what you folks and the elite 600 who have flown before you have experienced. The phenomenon of the overview effect, the ability to look down at the Earth from a perspective the rest of us have never seen, to see, it's been said before, of course, but to see a planet without borders, to see a planet without apparent conflict, to look down and see the thin onion skin of our atmosphere that's all that separates us from the killing, frigid vacuum of space, and to see the Earth as I described it when I wrote the book Apollo 13, still available in all fine stores, by the way, that the Earth is something like a fragile glass Christmas ball floating in space. Did you folks, and this is for any one of the four of you, did you come away with a greater sense of the overview effect?
They're all waiting for me to talk, I can tell. Yeah, the short answer is yes. And I think each of us were thinking about it before we launched and what we were expecting to see, what we were expecting to feel. And I think for each of us, it was something completely unexpected, which is what we took away from it. But also what's unexpected is that when you end up talking to other astronauts, it is a shared unexpected experience. And you do get a sense that this is a very special place. And I've heard it being said that you realize that you live on a planet. Yeah, I know I live on a planet, but no, you don't realize you live on this little tiny planet that's floating out in the nothingness of space. And it's a very special place that we all get to experience. And there's so much to explore, so much to experience here, that having that view from space really lets you appreciate that in a way that is really hard to describe. And, you know.
Jared, did you have any sense of this in your first look out the cupola at the Earth 300 some miles below you?
So I think that kind of that profound change that happens. It's part of the entire journey. Everything from the preparations leading into going space, knowing that you're approaching a point in time in your life where a controlled explosion with about 1.8 million pounds of thrust is going to accelerate you 17,500 miles an hour, and then you arrive, and then you've got that moment. And yes, but I think it's entirety of it, because the visuals of it looks incredible. But you can see that there's fantastic imagery and such, and it looks exactly like you'd expect it to be. And I think that I don't think you need to go to space to know that that we need to take care of our planet, and that we shouldn't. So many people shouldn't be dying, and there shouldn't be so much hardship and suffering over borders drawn on maps. Like, I think we should all know that before we ever begin on a journey like that. But I do think that everything that goes into it, everything that takes you there and back, forces you to take in those moments in maybe a different way. And I'll tell you, the moment for me, it was seeing the moon, right? That was my big surprise, and it turned out I was a horrible photography student, because I could either take a good picture of the moon or a good picture of the Earth, but not both at the same time. I'm sure science says why, but I'd say that what that made me feel like is it was an energizing feeling that we have to get going. I think it's in human nature. We're very curious. We want to understand what's out there. We want answers to questions we've all been thinking about for some time. And to me, like, our ability to understand, the universe right now, certainly to navigate it or access it, is like the modern day cell phone communication equivalent of stretching 2 cups and a short string between the two. We got a long way to go. And the question is how much progress do we want to make during our lifetime? And however much progress we're able to do there, it will only set up the future generations better to come. So that was kind of what I took away from it, and why I got so energized to kind of continue my journey with SpaceX as well. So.
The four of you appeared to fly not just as a crew, but as friends. And the closest analogy that I can come to is the Apollo 12 crew. Pete Conrad, Dick Gordon, and Al Bean, who were best friends for much of their lives as they were training and after their mission. I remember watching the view inside the spacecraft after the four of you strapped in, and there was a lot of mutual fist bumping going on. There seemed to be a lot of love in the group. Without getting too sappy here, can any of you speak to that? Speak to the friendship that developed among the four of you during the course of your training and your flight?
I think I've been nominated. So that was something really special. And before the mission, first it was just Jared, and then it was just me and Jared, and I thought a lot about who would fill the next two seats. And I thought we would all, of course, get close because we would spend a lot of time together with training. I didn't realize how close we would get, and I think what was something very indicative of that was we had this 30-hour simulation where we were in a model of our spacecraft for 30 hours straight at SpaceX. And afterwards, our trainers who were listening in for all 30 hours said they heard us say things like, "Oh, we only have 6 hours left," instead of like, "I can't wait to get out of here." Yeah. And we felt that way in space. I think, and people ask me a lot of times, like, did you get sick of your crew, or like, were you ready for some space? And I say, honestly, no. We had such a good time together. And, it was a bunch of different circumstances that brought us together. But it feels like we were always meant to be the crew of Inspiration4, and I couldn't have picked anyone better to go to space with.
I know, Chris, I think it was you who described the experience before you went as spending 3 or 4 days on a camping trip with your 3 best friends. And that seems to be what sort of captured it. I want to look forward a little bit into the future of space. Now, this is a little bit less about your personal experiences and more about what the implications of your flight might be. You have, I said a moment ago, that you in some ways kicked the door to space open for the rest of us, but you also helped kick the door open to space for the commercial sector. Do you think that we will see a growing and increasing presence of the private sector in space and a concomitant reduction of sovereign nations leading the space push? Will the push in space become driven by the private sector, do we believe?
I mean, if you look here on the campus of Space Camp, if you could see the change, I mean, you guys showed the video, just how we were pleading to keep the doors open at Space Camp, and now they're sold out for this summer, most of next summer. There's a brand new building being built currently. There's another one on the way. Last 2021, it was an incredible year for human spaceflight, seeing the first suborbital flights with Virgin Galactic, with Blue Origin, and then our flight in September with SpaceX. There's a renewed sense of excitement and energy that you just know is there, and you can see the dollars following it. The incentive and the financials that are being pumped into the space sector is incredible. The number of open positions for jobs that are trying to be filled, just in Seattle even, I mean, where I've come from, it's insane. There is such a drive and desire to see what we can do in space, to see how it's going to benefit all of us here on Earth. And absolutely, the stuff that we do here at camp is driving and making those ideas and dreams possible for those future generations. No doubt at all.
Yeah, I'd say in terms of, what the future holds, right? So there's a few ends to that few bookends here, right? One end is, we have a a thriving civilization on Mars. And then there's, probably a kind of a continuation of what we've seen, prior to the resumption of human spaceflight in the U.S. Of very occasional missions to space, right? And I think we've crossed a milestone where the least reusable technology that we've seen will drive, or already has driven down the cost to access low Earth orbit to such an extent that we're going to see, material transformation, at least with LEO. Right. So you said sovereign nations leading space. Probably not. You're going to have a lot of sovereign nations being customers of space. There are a lot of space programs all over the world where they've already declared astronauts for those programs and have science and research never been to space. They're going to be able to do that. I mean, you're going to have numerous nations, probably numerous international space stations, because we've already crossed the threshold to make that possible. Industry will certainly be able to have a presence in space, whether it's biomedical or otherwise. Like you're going to have, you're going to have people working in space for sure. And the KPI to measure is just the number of people on orbit at one time, which hit a new record when we were in space of 14 between the International Space Station, our Dragon, and the Chinese space station. That's going to go up, by orders of magnitude.
Right.
So I feel very good based on what's already been accomplished, that the cost is going to be driven down substantially enough just from present day technology to make everything I just said possible. As we get closer to the other end of the bookend, the one we're all excited about, that Star Wars, Star Trek world where we've got our personal X-Wings and such, it's still a long way to go, right? We were just, potentially exiting a period of like nearly 14, 15 years of a zero interest rate environment, which funds a lot of really ambitious projects with the idea that we can figure out maybe the revenue model for some of these things way down the road, right? And when you have so many things underway that are literally like Manhattan Project level endeavors, like making humankind a multiplanetary species, it's going to take a lot. It's going to take the will of the people, a lot less controversy than probably exists now about, if you like space, you must hate Earth. And if you like Earth, you have to hate space. Like, we got to get past some of those things. And with that and some luck and a lot of supportive capital, it's in the realm of possible in our lifetime that we could see people walking on Mars. And that's, even if it's just a shot, man, it's one worth taking and pretty damn exciting.
Do you think we'll see people on the moon in this decade?
I feel very good about that, possibly.
Very good about that. Yes, I agree. I want to ask you one more question. Actually, I'll ask you 31 more questions if we're allowed the time. So somebody wave me off when we're out of time. I want to ask you a question that the rest of us feel. I once asked Jim Lovell, before you went on Apollo 8, did you sit in your living room and did you at any point look around and think, if this does not work, I am not going to see this room again? And Jim kind of looked at me and smiled and said, no. If you thought that way, you wouldn't go. How did the four of you overcome the mortal stakes of what you were doing? The Falcon 9 is a reliable rocket. It has flown many people to space. It's landed, I think it's had 120 launches so far, but still, it's a risky venture. How did you make that mortal calculus of saying, I realize I'm taking a chance, but this is a chance that is very much worth taking?
Well, I feel like I've been chasing space my entire life. So by the time it came to liftoff, I was ready for it. People have asked me, was I afraid to go to space, or was I afraid when I was up in space? And I always say no. I was far more terrified that opportunity would never come. And then even when we got selected, getting selected was like getting selected for the Olympic team. You still had to train and win the gold. And so I was far more afraid that during that 6 months of training, I would get hurt or sick, or I wouldn't qualify as the mission pilot. Right. And so by the time, we got through all of that, I was just so happy to be strapped in and headed on that lifelong journey of wanting to go to the stars. And so I think that for me, it didn't matter because that was what I wanted to do. That was where I wanted to go. Right. And so regardless of what may or may not happen, but I will say that the training from SpaceX gave me every bit of confidence, and then being with my crew members, that this was an endeavor we could take on and be successful at.
Well, I get nervous at Space Mountain at Disney World, so don't go by me. And Hayley, when I was talking to your mom today about how she dealt with it, I said, I get anxious when my daughter's taking Uber, so I have no idea.
She does too.
She does too. Last question, unless we are allowed to go a little further. The International Space Station is very much by definition, an international endeavor. We are now seeing the Artemis Accords, 20 nations signing on to collaborate with America's effort to get back to the moon. What do you think about the idea of space collaboration as an instrument as a potentiator of global peace and global diplomacy, and might we continue to see the growth of global collaboration building upon the 15-nation collaboration of the International Space Station?
I mean, when I was lobbying Congress, that was a realization that space is the one subject that seemed to bring all sides of the political spectrum together to communicate, to push an agenda forward, and to figure out how we're going to make this all work. And I think this is what's really great about space and thinking about the future that way, is that we have an opportunity to take the best of us to space, and we can make a great choice of leaving behind those things that we have failed at for so many millennia, that we can now take an opportunity, like Sian, you said so many times, we have that silly discussion about Star Wars versus Star Trek, and I say Battlestar Galactica every time. But science, well, yeah. Well, in science, your great answer is always you'd rather trek your way through the galaxy than fight your way through it. And I think it's always stuck with me, and I think it's absolutely true. It's what space can do. It brings people together. We think about the impossible becoming possible, and space is unique that way.
And just to add on to that, I think that when you're talking about the world coming together, because that's what we're trying to do, go from the idea of how do we work together for such an amazing endeavor, and when we say space is for everyone, do we truly mean that? And so one of the things that I'm really passionate about is, like, how do we create a Jedi space, a just, equitable, diverse, and inclusive space for all of humanity? Because we're writing that narrative of human spaceflight right now, and how we do it matters. Who we pick, how we pick them, and how we include humanity is going to matter. And Inspiration4, why I'm so proud to be a part of this mission, and Jared's vision, is that he set the framework for creating a Jedi space. Thinking about how can it be just, equitable, diverse, and inclusive. And so I think that if we can hold ourselves to that endeavor, then just imagine what the world is going to look like, 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now.
Sure. All right. And I had said that was going to be the last question, but it's actually the second to last question. I just want to ask, Chris, if you could go back, would you?
Short answer, yes. There's a longer answer after that. Aaron, we could talk later.
Hayley.
I would love to go back in a heartbeat. I absolutely loved my experience in space, but I'm not going to go back because, like you said, there's been less than 600 people in all human existence who have ever been, and I'm not going to take that opportunity from someone else.
Sian?
Yeah, heck yeah. 3 days wasn't enough.
Yeah. And Jared, I know your answer. All right. Well, I want to thank the crew for being with us tonight, and I also want to thank them sincerely for what they've accomplished, for what they've given us, and for what they've given the space community in the world. They've opened up space, and for that we owe them a great debt of gratitude.
Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.